Now onto a New York Stock Exchange market update with Michael Reinking. He's a senior market strategist at NYSE. So good to see you, Michael. Bring us up to date on the market action.
Yes. So, to put things in perspective, right, we started the year kind of coming off of back-to-back 20% gains for the S&P 500, right? The economy was set up, in a good place where we were starting to see kind of a moderation of economic activity, and this disinflationary process had been, kind of moving forward. Now, the expectations for price increases related to tariffs, right, did pull forward some demand. We definitely saw that in Q4, in Q1 data. But now, as we're kind of waiting to see what policy, ultimately looks like, as companies start to work through some of that inventory, we'd expect to see a little bit of a slowdown in activity. But if that kind of those tariffs start to come in, in line with where market expectations are currently, somewhere in kind of the low teens, a far cry from what we'd seen in the Rose Garden. But I do think, kind of the economy is set up to kind of muddle through, right? You would see some portion of those tariffs passed on to the consumers, suppliers eating some portion of that, and then businesses, kind of taking a small hit on margins. But in general, I think, we can continue to move forward, and it does put the Fed's dual mandate a little bit at odds with itself. But if we don't see a big impact on inflation, we could start to see the Federal Reserve begin, cutting rates, later in the fall.
Well, after a sluggish time, the IPO market is coming alive. What can you tell us?
We've seen a big pickup in that activity. Companies have been able to kind of raise more capital, in their IPOs, pricing above the range, being able to upsize those deals, which means they're, able to kind of reinvest that back into their business. And, those companies, as they've come to market, right, there's been, very strong demand from investors. We've seen them trade very well, kind of in the secondary market, which, sets us up, to continue to, kind of continue to see that pipeline come to market. We do, expect to see probably a little bit of a slowdown during that summer time period, just from a seasonal perspective. But as we move into Q3 and Q4, I would expect to see, kind of quite a bit more IPO activity.
Good to know. What factors do you think are likely to drive the market into the next quarter?
Yeah, no, so, we clearly, kind of with the situation in the Middle East have, introduced a little bit more uncertainty. So we're going to need to see kind of how that starts to, kind of play out in the coming weeks and how that impacts, kind of commodity markets. I think July is set up to be a very, very interesting month. We have the, kind of the trade negotiation deadlines in that first week, where we're looking at Congress, kind of trying to move forward with that big, beautiful bill, right? But if you think about kind of what markets got wrong maybe in the first half, right, it was looking at the Trump agenda, using kind of Trump 1.0 as that guide, where in his first term, there was the focus on kind of pro-growth and tax policy to start. This time, we focused on kind of more protectionist policies, but we're now starting to move into that pro-growth agenda, right? And where we could see, kind of tax cuts, kind of some deregulatory action taken by the administration. And that sets up for a positive back half of the year as the focus begins to shift.
The New York Stock Exchange is expanding in Texas. That's exciting.
Yes, very, very exciting for the New York Stock Exchange. So NYSE Texas is the first exchange listed in or incorporated in the state of Texas, right? When you think of the New York Stock Exchange, we already have deep roots and ties to the Lone Star State. It's the state with the most NYSE listed companies in the country, making up nearly $4 trillion of market capitalization, right? And the economy in Texas and population growth, has become a key driver for the United States, economy in general. And that's really a testament, to the pro-growth and pro-business jurisdiction that Governor Abbott has set up. He's talked about wanting to create a local capital markets ecosystem, and NYSE Texas is the first building block in doing that.
Great to have you here. We hope you come back.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you again soon.